Have you ever imagined your 28-year-old son coming to you and saying, "Mom, I don't want to get married"? Or your daughter comes to you and says she has a crush on the girl next door. Or I could be that mother, and how am I supposed to deal with it? Obviously, it will take me some time to come to terms with it. But I am sure about one thing, that I will not consider it unnatural, or I will not ostracize my children for that. I'll try to create atmosphere which is more inclusive. This is Indu Punj. In today's video, I am going to talk about inclusion in our classrooms, LGBT community. Why have they been ostracized? Is it really unnatural? And what do we do? What steps do we need to take to create inclusion in our classrooms? Starting with inclusive learning. How is it defined? Inclusive learning and teaching recognizes every student's entitlement to a learning experience that respects diversity, enables participation, removes barriers, and anticipates and considers a variety of learning needs and preferences. The definition is comprehensive and needs no detailed explanation, but concepts are like plans, easily understood, charted, but mostly poorly, partially, or half-heartedly executed. The key word in the definition is diversity. Diversity brings out a subtle behavioral variance, mostly seated at a subconscious level. In this series, we would try to deal with the bias and stereotyping that accompanies the diversity that any learning setup has at its very heart. Now the question comes, why discuss LGBT? Because of all other diversities, this has been the hardest to deal with for parents, teachers, peers, and the society itself. Large part of the 20th and 21st century was spent in struggle for an identity by this community, a set of people who have been long ostracized based on their sexual orientation. Something that as a fundamental principle, if not a right, should be a freedom of choice, and that too a personal one. Though the community has come a long way in its battle for a legal status and identity, the social texture always takes a longer time to assimilate what's essentially been a taboo for a period nearly unknown. Hence, the need for an exclusive discussion on inclusive learning sensitivities towards the LGBT community. The discussion would focus on how the Indian culture has long procrastinated to deal with the problem, which now is an everyday reality for teachers, co-students, friends, family, peers, and the culture and country as a whole. Why have they been ostracized? One word that tends to create an overwhelming urge to keep them at an arm's length is unnatural. For centuries, with roots in religion and God's will and teachings, any orientation other than being attracted to opposite sex has been viewed as twisted, sinful, and outrightly unacceptable. The monopoly of opposite sex relation has always pushed LGBT community out of the circle of acceptance in our society. India decriminalized same-sex sexual activity in 2018, but challenges remain at the ground level. Inclusion and acceptance is still awaiting a nod from society and its flag bearers. Though acceptance and change is coming, surely, but at a pace insidious to community lurching in the dark for too long now. Is it really unnatural? In his groundbreaking book, Homo Sapiens, Yuval Harari clears the myth of unnatural. He says cultures and religions tend to argue that it forbids only that which is unnatural. But very importantly, from a biological perspective, nothing is unnatural. If it's possible, it is natural. Whatever is possible is by definition natural. He argues, and rightly so, a truly unnatural behavior, one that goes against the laws of nature, simply does not exist. So it needs no prohibition. Religion and culture does not prohibit men to photosynthesize or women to run faster than the speed of light, which is not biologically impossible and therefore unnatural. Cultures prohibit behavior that tends to suit their story, popularity, and in-line antediluvian mindset. Mother Nature does not mind men and women being sexually attracted to one another. It's only human mothers, fathers, friends, teachers, well-wishers who make a scene if their daughter has a romantic interest in the girl next door. It has been so deeply embedded in Indian culture and most cultures that it's a matter of shame, at times culminating in consequences as extreme as suicides and honor killings. Everyday nagging, shaming, taunting, and ostracizing is, let's say, natural. Now, talking about inclusion in classrooms, how can we create inclusive classrooms? How can we create atmosphere which is conducive for learning, where children feel more accepted, where they have the right to express themselves irrespective of their gender orientation, their sexual preferences, for being different. Their cousins, their peer group, their friends do not accept them the way they are. And it's not only others accepting them, they themselves feel that there is something different about themselves. It is a difficult thing for them to accept themselves. So here comes the role of a teacher, which is extremely important, because by the time they come to know about their sexual orientation, their gender preferences, school becomes their first home. The role of a teacher is extremely of paramount importance here, because she is the one who can create that classroom where child feels emotionally secure, accepted for being different also. What are the steps that she is required to take as a teacher? She has to stop being homophobic. What is homophobia? Homophobia stems from the thought of imagining same gender intimacy, which feels repulsive to heterosexual individuals. The moment you leave that visualization aside, the person becomes just as normal and ordinary as yourself. Therefore, homophobia is not a fear, but a visualization of something that does not appeal or arouse you. Just disconnect the person from his or her sexual orientation. In a classroom with an inclusive atmosphere, a child must feel accepted for being different. Engage in healthy conversations, healthy dialogues. Do not discourage them from expressing their identity or share their thoughts by discarding them as sinful or wrong or against the norm. An inclusive classroom should not differentiate on the basis of sexual preferences or orientation. Acceptance is the key to change in every society. Do not use demeaning words. Do not categorize students based on any such parameter. Just as some people are straight, some people are lesbian or gay or bisexual. It's nothing to do with the ability to learn, share, or being part of an organization. Stop moral policing. As mentioned earlier, the age at which a child learns about his or her sexual orientation, school has become his or her first home. Do not judge or demoralize. Encourage other students to be unbiased. If students find teachers being normal, they would imitate the same. The lesser the acceptance of bias, the sooner the bias would lose its relevance. Be protective if needed. Make sure other students do not mock, bully, or discriminate, or use cuss words to address students with different sexual orientation than theirs. The core purpose of any educational institution is to impart learning impartially and provide equal opportunity to each individual, irrespective of which category they belong to, in terms of sexual preferences or otherwise. They face even bigger challenges at home, where acceptance is even more difficult, owing to factors such as social acceptance, family status, fear of ostracism, and mocking. Inclusive classrooms can bring about this change in society, which eventually will melt down to other sections of society for wider and amicable acceptance. Conclusion: this initiative, however small, can have everlasting impact on generations to come. Speaking of generations, the most experienced teachers, parents, mentors, influencers, and authority bearers are those born between 1970 to 1990 today. The generation, though, have various tags to it, but I prefer to use the word dangling generation. We are a generation which has experienced a life which took a very high moral ground on such sensitive topics, and then we are witnessing a drift in those very moral values with the advent of internet. We are not going to remember our existence in BC and AD, but BI and AI, before internet and after internet. The elder you were before the internet, the harder is the acceptance and transition. There would always be nostalgia of days that were and the temptation of exposure and possibilities. We would continue to oscillate between the two for life. This then brings us to another important aspect which I would add as an end note: the capability to not just learn but willingness to unlearn. It is imperative for us, the dangling generation, to unlearn what is essential for further evolution of generations. We are responsible to guide and train. I would sum up the entire discussion with an appeal to unlearn some of the deep-rooted beliefs, rigid dogmas about an individual's sexual orientation, so that we have one variable less when we discuss stereotypes and biases in our grad books a decade from now. Thank you, dear friends. I hope to leave you with the thought to unlearn all those beliefs, to unlearn all those ideas which have been given to us over the generations, over years. Let's change. Let's make our classrooms more inclusive. Let's be more accepting and be more loving. Let's make life easy for our own children. This is Indu Punj signing off.